Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, your one-stop shop for exploring the connections between fitness, health, and overall well-being. Join us as we dive deep into all aspects of a balanced and vibrant life, from pushing your limits in the gym to finding peace of mind outside of it. Whether you're a seasoned athlete or just starting your journey, you are in the right place to discover the knowledge and insight to perfect your fitness life.
All right, we are live once again with the Think Fitness Life podcast, mindset, exercise, and nutrition. And today I am with a very special guest, Brent Stevenson out of Vancouver, Canada, who is a physiotherapist, a co-owner of 2 multidisciplinary health clinics, and the author of 2 books. He's the father of 3 teenage children and a happily married husband. He has a Bachelor of Human Kinetics, also a Master's of Physiotherapy, and a long list of postgraduate training, including IMS dry needling and visceral manipulation. His first book you can find on Amazon, called Why Things Hurt: Life Lessons from a Injury-Prone Physical Therapist, which I think is really funny because I do think we all kind of start out in this field as kind of walking the walk before we get to talk the talk. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, very much so. I kind of came by my profession, honestly. I grew up with 2 PE teachers for parents and kind of played every different sport imaginable. And was a long, lanky, tall, skinny kid that was pretty good at hurting himself. And so I have pretty good empathy for a lot of the people I'm treating. I've been through it as both the patient and the practitioner.
And at that age, when you're first getting injured, you probably had to learn so much more about the body than anyone else in your demographic was doing at the time, just because of your injuries.
Totally. I call it now sort of people's stop and learn moments where people that have been athletes in the past have more of a relationship with their bodies because they have had to train them. They've pushed through things. They've usually had to experience injuries just from the product of doing more with themselves. And you can learn what good feels like, what bad feels like, and really have to work at finding some normalcy again, which becomes my role as a physio.
Can you narrow all of your injuries down to like a top 3 that were the most educating experiences to overcome?
I'd say one of my big ones when I was younger that ended up really playing a role in my life was I played a lot of rugby in high school and sort of a very contact sport, and I was more built to be a swimmer or a volleyball player. I'm 6'5" and really loose jointed. So tackling big sort of stiff, strong guys was not my best move, but we had one of the best rugby teams in the city and our province. And just before the playoffs came, I was in my grade 12 year. We had one of the best teams around and I dislocated my shoulder. And took 4 to 6 weeks, tried to really work at rehabbing it, getting it back to try to get back onto our back into competition mode and try to get to play in the playoffs, and got to the game right before playoffs and then dislocated it again, which knocked me out. And so I had to sit and physically it hurt. It was terrible. It was uncomfortable. But then the psychological piece of having to sit on the sidelines and be a glorified water boy for my teammates go through the championships. And then that summer we had our team was going to Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji to go compete down there, and my shoulder was just destroyed, but I very committed to going. So I had a great trip, but it didn't. Again, had to kind of go along and be with the team and not play. So in my late teens, I learned the psychological piece of trying to come back from an injury, where elements of it are physical, but a lot of it, the longer lasting part of it becomes psychological. So that really started at a young age for me. And then so that was an earlier, more influential one. And then going forward, I injured my knee. I sprained my ankles. I broke my wrist playing baseball, sliding into third base. And, the one that really has been the most impactful in my life, and the one that I kind of ended up pulling together my first book, the why things hurt life lessons from an injury-prone physical therapist was I was playing ball hockey in a community center, just with a bunch of 30, 40-year-old guys, and ended up getting one of those hard orange ball hockey balls right in the eye, which really flipped my world upside down. At the time, I had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old around that age.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, I lost all the vision in my right eye and had to go to the hospital and ended up having 4 surgeries in about 2 months and another 3 over the following year. A battle trying to get my vision back, and
Yeah.
ended up no vision, and then blurry vision, and then double vision, and then all sorts of headaches and all sorts of procedures, and having to get really deeply embedded in the medical system, and both in the position of being really urgently having to push people out of the way so I could make room for my surgery, and then going back to being in the kind of purgatory of waiting to see what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So I had to move out of my house, away from my wife and kids, and sort of hang out at my mom's place for 3 months, trying to rehab and become a functional human being again. So it was, again, that was really horribly painful. But as time passed, and our bodies are reasonably good at structurally trying to fix things.
Mm. Mm.
But it becomes the psychological piece of sort of the trauma that comes with it, and the learning to figure out your new normal.
Yeah.
That drives a lot of people's experience, and it's a big part behind the tensions and the pains and the chronic issues that people sort of experience.
Mm. So how long was that period with people basically only being able to see out of one eye?
Uh, it was, well, depending on, I had like literally I had 7 surgeries in a year, so it kept what it, I was part of the reason it was blind in there was the eye filled with blood. I put a hole through my macula, it all filled up, and I got an orbital floor fracture, and my retina detached. So there's all sorts of reasons why I couldn't see. And then
Yeah.
after all the different surgeries, I came back to be able to see something, but it was like looking through a distorted underwater view where your central vision just disappears. If you look directly at something, it just turns into a smudge.
Yeah.
Uh, and after about 3 months in between surgeries, I decided I had to drag myself out of bed and try to get back to work and get moving, because I just and I had horrible double vision. I'd try to look at the client I was trying to help, and I could see their own other floating head over up to the right of them, and my vision was terrible, and I was in more pain probably than they were. But I was like, I know I need to get moving again.
Yeah.
And and I was and over time I had to, like, part of what I do as a physio is I work with people's neuroplasticity and training things for people, like getting repetitive movement and doing things. Your nervous system can adapt, and I knew that. And I knew it. My life was too busy to try to do picky little eye exercises, so I just had to keep moving and keep doing things. So decided to coach my kids' baseball team, and with really terrible depth perception, had a whole bunch of kids throw balls at me, and I um, had to learn to catch again, learn my depth perception, and just sort of battle through, and uh, month by month
Step
and
by
year by
step.
year, it
Yeah.
slowly improved.
That is definitely a long journey. But so you did mention a little bit about the psychological component that came with the first injury. I think it was your shoulder, and then you talked
Yeah.
about a psychological component with your eye. How do they differ in experience?
Well, I think the biggest difference was, again, in my job as a physio. I'm there trying to help other people. And a lot of people knew what had happened. There's
Yeah.
some level of what had happened to me. So I see a new person every half an hour. Every half an hour, I had to kind of relive and tell my story a little bit. And people
Okay.
wanted to, like, were concerned about me, wanted to know.
For sure.
And then a lot of time had passed. They kind of assumed that I like, well, it's better now, right? And I was like, well, actually, no, it's actually not. But then that went on. It became a bit of a ongoing part of my identity for a couple of
Right.
years
Like,
that
it
I
was
was
so
trying to
top of
shed.
mind. It was so relevant at every
Yeah,
experience. Yeah.
And that was part of like I got tired of telling a little piece of my story with it. So I eventually went on to my whythingshurt.com site and sat down and cathartically wrote out everything that I'd kind of gone through. It was about my eye injury.
Yeah.
After a while, I started telling people, if you really want to know that battle that I went through, it's all on there. You can go read it. And I wrote it from a 3 months later perspective, and then another one from a 1 year later perspective.
And
And
these were blog
that
posts you're saying on the website?
those were
Yeah.
those are blog posts. Those ones are included in my first book. My first book is more, it gets a lot into posture and mechanics, and it was written back when the sort of barefoot shoes started becoming more of a thing, and the role of pregnancy, and starts to introduce the role of trauma and stress into things, but it's a little bit more on the physical sides of things. So that it started as a collection of blog posts from my website, and then that eye injury kind of motivated me and pulled a lot of things together. And I wrote a lot more sort of surrounding it and put it into it's a collection of stories, of explanations of how I explain to people sort of how their bodies actually work in a meaningful way, and surrounded by stories of other people's journeys and traumas of whether their challenges with the medical system or their journey of working with personal trainers and physios and massage therapists trying to figure out their own body.
Yeah.
And then fast forward 10 years, I've now have 3 teenagers, which is so I have that on one side of me, and sort of aging parents on the other side of me. And the experience of after writing the first book has tilted my caseload more towards people with chronic and resistant pain issues. And with that does come there's usually embedded a real sort of stress, anxiety, fear sort of baked into it. And
Yeah.
the experience of COVID and all of that's gone on in the last 4 or 5 years, I've really just noticed as a physiotherapist the root cause, when you get to know somebody well enough, that's bringing people in for physiotherapy for their persistent discomfort, are a lot of the physical manifestations of that stress, anxiety, and fear that's surrounding them in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it's amazing what the mind can create physically, right? I think we used to think that, oh, it's just hokey pokey, it's just all in your head type of deal. But there's a physiological, there's a chemical component that's going on that can manifest itself into more of a reality, unfortunately.
Yeah, very much so. And when you don't understand how that actually works in your body, it in itself becomes its own stress and fear, and you get people
But kind of
seeking out
chasing their
help.
tail, that kind of
They're chasing
adds.
their tail.
Yeah.
And the tendency is initially to go to your family physician, and their first default is like, well, let's take X-rays, let's take pictures of inside of you, and the structure of inside of you doesn't necessarily directly correlate to what you experience physically in your body.
Mhm.
And so, like, you can hurt yourself doing a deadlift in the gym, or sitting at your desk all day and it's getting really stiff, or falling off a treadmill or being hit by a car. But you also, when you get into the boilermaker of having a lot of stresses with kids and work and life and finances, that our brain, we're very cerebral people. Our bodies will be able to kind of repress the stresses that we're feeling in our body to be able to continue to deal with what's immediately in front of you.
Yeah.
You might not necessarily, particularly guys, might sort of like, oh, I'm not stressed, I'm okay, I can do this, but their bodies can be screaming at you otherwise.
Yeah.
And so that might be why your back goes out on you, or your hips really tight and sore, or you're clenching your jaw. And that recurrent tension really can translate into physical things that can be the root of tendinitises and tennis elbows and heel pain. And so my job's sort of that knowledge translation piece
Yeah.
of teaching people how that works to help dissipate the role that fear is playing, while
Yeah.
treating them and giving them some relief and helping them feel more what normal is supposed to feel like.
Yeah, I think that's a very crucial component that you don't hear about in their everyday physical therapy experience. I think everyone just goes and gets checked out. Maybe it's a shoulder, a knee, or a low back, and then they're given a pamphlet of exercises they need to do and get the physical component it's almost like they feel the pain. It's like water spilling over a cup. And it's like these little exercises help just that get a little bit of gap so it no longer spills over the cup anymore. So you don't experience that, like, painstakingly, that kind of that show-stopping pain experience. But it's almost like you got the water out of the boat, but you forgot to plug up the hole. So I love
exactly.
that that's a different component that you bring to the table of trying to almost be like, it sounds like a body whisperer in terms of, getting their system to recover, but then educating them on that. And if you could dive into that a little bit more, I think that's such an underutilized skill set, is being able to translate all the knowledge that a kinesiology degree has, human physiology, psychobiology, into a way that this individual right here in front of you can understand.
Totally. And that's that really becomes my, as a physio, be the connector in someone's healthcare team, of trying to, I have a bit more time with the person than maybe their doctor does. And I have that some of that knowledge base, and I have skill sets to physically treat them. And that can be really helpful. But if you just stick with the physically treating perspective, you end up with a lot of people, they keep coming back with the same things. You can give them relief, but it's sort of this steam release valve of letting tension off without getting to the root cause of something, which is where I put a lot of effort and attention into helping people in a way that makes sense to them. Like if they're a person who comes in and they're a structural engineer, I'm talking to them in the means of structural engineering. Or if they're a baseball player, I'm like, okay, well, how is it that this is affecting your pitching form? Or a golfer, I spent lots of time working with golfers. And some people hate the gym. Some people hate working out. And so like you have to teach them, they have to find some meaningful level of movement. And most of the time when people come in with a physical complaint, they are a bit focused on wanting to know what they've injured or what it is that's hurting. And the medical system generally does tend to feed into that too. So starting with that as the connection point of teaching them some of the relevant anatomy in the area, but then how things are connected more. You can probably hear my dog barking in the background.
You're fine.
And understand how your nervous system works from an electrical wiring standpoint, of how sort of tension is held in your body, and how that and generally people hold their day-to-day tensions and stresses in and around their muscular system. Like your upper trap muscles that connect your neck to your shoulder are probably number one in terms of where people hold tension. And the deep hip rotator muscles in your butt are probably number two. A lot gets blamed on your piriformis because your sciatic nerve runs right through there. But all those deep hip rotator muscles will get tight for some reasons, posturally and biomechanically, how a person's moving, but more so it's where people hold a lot of their stress. And they have a big attachment into the small of your back, and all the muscles that attach to your knee all attach in there. So your hips and your pelvis are the center of your universe. And helping people understand it from a biomechanical standpoint first, and then start to show them that they are an emotional being too, and we tend to hold our deeper seated emotional issues and worries and past traumas more in and around our organs. So your heart and lungs are your big emotional center, and they sit in the center of your chest. And if you're really stressed or worried about something, you will hold tension in and around sort of your heart and lungs, and that's partly what your muscular system will start to wrap around. I literally spend my day like poking and prodding people as I get to know them. I do a lot of IMS dry needling, which can really allow you to tap into people's nervous system and affect their muscle tone fairly quickly. And I do a form of osteopathic manual therapy called visceral manipulation that helps you feel. It's really anatomy based, of understanding where organs attach and how those are attached to different emotional states and how they tug and pull on you from the inside. So showing that, my room's full of posters of anatomy, and just trying to, after I've objectively looked at someone, try to teach them at a level that's meaningful enough to them to understand it a bit.
Without
and
losing,
then walk forward.
probably.
Without losing them. Yeah, you can
Yeah,
see some people want more information and some people want less. So
right.
you got to find the level that's meaningful to them and then follow through by doing something to them to release tension, so help them to feel differently. And then jump into movement training and teach them how to sort of what it was they're doing that might be creating that issue in the first place.
Hmm.
And then once they've learned the skill of the movement, then start adding load and resistance and training or sort of strengthening issues onto it with them.
Do you have some standard protocols that you like to follow in terms of like a functional screening?
Um, I wouldn't say I do have a general flow of how I go through working with someone. I don't
Like in the
necessarily have
assessment
like a
phase, but before you're actually doing work with them, like what's your process look like for assessing an individual?
well, first it's talking to them and starting to see that just give them an opportunity to tell their story and see what I try to figure out what I think's meaningful to them and what their paradigm of how they're seeing the world through. Then the first thing I'll do is I'll stand them in front of a mirror and just lightly place my hand on the center of their back. It's generally a non-threatening thing to do and a calming kind of place to just put a hand on somebody
Yeah.
and ask them to take a deep breath. And you'll see if you just say, take a deep breath, you learn a lot about what person does if you ask them that. A lot of people will go and take this huge, hard, deep breath and try to get all the breath, like all the air into them in 1 second. And like, okay, well, that's like, that tells me a little bit about you. And some people will slowly take this big, or they'll ask you, where do you want me to breathe from? And some people
Mm.
are very connected to how they're breathing, and some have no idea.
Yeah.
I usually then will just ask the person to start marching a little bit, trying to see how well they
Can stand
how
on one
well they
leg
move,
essentially, or yeah.
stand on one leg, and how well they move through their hips,
Yeah.
um, and do a bit of a half squat and just see what their version of bending looks like.
Yeah.
Um, and then usually pretty quickly, I'll put one hand on their shoulder and one hand on their arm, and just gently, passively abduct and lift their arm. And you can learn a lot about a person from just doing that. You'll see as soon as you touch somebody and try to lift their arm, you'll see some people will
Fight
tense and
it.
brace and try to predict what you're doing and guard and hold and control the whole process. And some people are just will be they'll give you their arm. They'll be this limp, flaccid thing, and you can tell pretty quickly if a person is genetically hypermobile and loose jointed or not. That's one of the first things I'm screening for, because
Mm.
that really is a game changer in terms of if you're going to start uh, loosening things and teaching them movement. Some people are just genetically have more of a protein called elastin in all of their soft tissues, and it makes them all your tendons, muscles, ligaments, and joints capsules are more loosely held together,
Mm.
which will make them inherently more flexible. But usually, they usually tend to have a lot of bracing strategies, and which can get very compressive in the body, and although they can be more flexible, can feel way tenser and tighter and stiffer, even though they can be very deceiving when you start moving them around that they've got flexibility, but it's a much more challenging motor control thing to hold all these moving pieces together.
Mm.
So I'm looking for that as I
Mm.
get them to march, squat, bend, touch their toes. And so I'm partly objectively looking at their alignment, their movements like, and I'm learning what their personality is like along the way.
I love it. I love it. So, you went back and you were saying the certain stresses will manifest in different areas. Do you have kind of like a
Yep.
cheat sheet on that? Like what do we manifest around our heart and lungs? What do we manifest around our gut? What do we manifest for headaches or carry?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
There's I have a good poster in my room through the Upledger Society, which are that kind of goes by each organ and sort of puts it's a general framework of how different organs tend to be associated with different emotions.
Hmm.
It's not an exact science, but
For
if you
sure.
start looking at it if you start working with people for a while, you start seeing, oh yeah, there is something to this. And
And you start just matching like
generally,
with like. If they tell a story and they have a lot of like anger or something, and then you see on the
mhm.
chart that it carries and their traps are tight, then you're like, well, this is probably related.
Yeah, no, it's the generally sort of stress as a global kind of thing tends to be more
Right.
around your chest and your heart and lungs. A lot of grief people hold in their bronchial tubes, which are under kind of
Interesting.
your first couple of ribs.
Yeah.
And your heart's held in a bag called your pericardium that's attached by ligaments to the inside of your sternum, the upper front part of your neck, and then just above your diaphragm and your mid back. So a lot of people that get a lot of this persistent upper back pain or tension or in their neck, it can be all like your upper traps and things, but the stress, tension, pull from your heart from inside of you will tug on your neck, and it will start to create this pull down. It's like it tries to pull your head into your body like a turtle. It can get very compressive on the middle part of your neck. Um, so like that's probably the most common one. I'd say
So it's
anxiety in
grief.
general tends
Okay, grief and
grief. Yeah,
anxiety. Yeah.
grief and anxiety, grief and stress up here. I'd say a lot of anxiety tends to be partly the chest, a lot more into the loops of your small intestine and into your abdomen, and it messes with your digestive tract. And it fills up most of the space of the bowl of your pelvis, and it attaches to the front of your spine and your back. So if you're if you're really nervous, your stomach kind of turns into knots, and that
Mm,
physically is a thing that can happen inside you, and it tugs on your back. And so a lot
right.
of times, if you're like people's low backs go out on them in very inopportune times, usually around Christmas, their in-laws are visiting, or they've got a big sort of deadline at work, and it's not usually that they've just sat at their desk all the time. It's part of it, but the that'll get held in their guts, and you
Yeah.
go through and loosen up the muscles in the hips and back. That can be very helpful. But if you actually learn the skill of how to feel fascially and viscerally what's sort of tugging and pulling in your abdomen, the small intestine is a big part. In
Mm.
women, their uterus and their bladder, like right in the small of, particularly women that have had miscarriages or have kids and have a lot of emotional connection to parenting. You can get and or have had just the relative physical trauma of pregnancy. The ligaments that hold your uterus and the inside of your pelvis can hold on to tension and be the driving force that starts to create a recurrent tension in your hip.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
anger tends to be more around your liver and your kidneys, kind of deeper inside you. But
yeah.
again, it's sort of fairly general.
Right. And so you'll in your assessment phase when you're talking to them and they you know are explaining things in a very stressed manner, and then you go to your physical assessment, hand on their back, tell them to breathe, and you find that they do have that tension built in their chest, pulling everything forward, and kind of that upper cross position. Are you where do you go next? Are you talking to them first and explaining how they're related, how the emotionality is recited to related to the physicality, or are you going right to the physical modality first?
It depends on the person, but I
Okay.
typically like you can see some people are eh, most people are not wanting you to just tell them first off they're just stressed. Like that's not what they want to hear. They'll just perceive that as you saying it's all in your head, and that's a big part of
Ah, okay.
what my book is trying to. It takes more than a couple times to try to uh, impart that to them that they won't take it defensively. And a lot of people will not resonate or connect with the idea that they're stressed. They can. A lot of people are very cognitive, very cerebral. They're competent and able to accomplish all the things that are in front of them at the cost of ignoring what they're feeling in their body. So they might cognitively not sort of connect with the idea that they're stressed or anxious while their body's sort of screaming at them with tension. So I rarely will immediately sort of say that to people, and like some people come off as just stress balls when you're talking to them, and some totally are not, but they both still might be. Uh, there's usually some role of anxiety or stress involved in it at some capacity. So I'll usually objectively look at them and initially focus on the anatomy and showing them more of the biomechanics of how things are translating to why things are hurting with them.
Mm.
And then first go-to is usually doing IMS, like dry needling with them, and sort of more treating into their tensions they hold in their muscular system. It the act of doing that's partly therapeutic, partly diagnostic for me, because you can get a very immediate reaction in bracing muscle tone from doing dry needling, where you could move a person's hip around and feel that they're getting a real hip impingement and it's pinching and jamming in the front, or their hip won't fall out, or their back hurts. And you can get in with needles into these muscles and cause them to contract really strongly and then reflexively relax. And the person can feel the difference almost immediately a lot of the time. Uh, and seeing how they respond to that. Some people, it does not bother them at all. And some people can't, like, have a very hard time with it and can have a very emotional reaction to it. So that also tells me something. But usually, even if they had a hard time with it or it was not that big of a deal, they will usually, you can get them objectively kind of decompressed and feeling and moving a bit better. So that, from a therapeutic standpoint, it's usually more my go-to initially, and then
maybe explaining after.
I explain the anatomy to a bit, usually more from the muscular fascial side. That makes more sense to them, and I usually start with that. I then, after I've done some of the kneeling or released something, I more shift in the manual therapy mode, and I start feeling their head, I'm feeling their neck, I'm feeling their chest, I'm feeling their abdomen. Haven't usually totally told them what I'm doing at that point.
Are you kind of like stimulating a body scan for their nervous system to take over? Like you're kind of giving stimulus for the brain to kind of check in with these different systems?
No, I'm more physically, like, once I've gotten them to stand up and move around initially and squat and look at their alignment, and I have them lie on the bed, I'm moving their shoulder around, I'm moving their hip around, and I can feel what's physically blocking that joint from moving normally. And then those are the muscles or the places I'm targeting to try to release them and see if I can make it move more normally. And then I move it again and help them feel and see, like, oh, I see that your hip's not pinching anymore. Get them to stand up, do a squat, and they're like, whoa, that feels different. And then when it shifts more to the visceral fascial side of things, that's more me going into problem solving mode of trying to feel where I like. And with the osteopathic side of things, they'd call it listening. Like, you start by just gently putting a hand on a person's head and trying to see where there's something pulling more than other, and then going on their chest and going on their abdomen, just see if you tend to be drawn one direction or another. And then you have to have a pretty strong understanding of anatomy and what things feel like. You start going to another layer of releasing things, and it may be a stress thing, that maybe they've had different surgeries, if they came in with a foot thing and I find me starting to push on the ribs, I usually have hit a point where I got to start explaining what I'm doing to them. Like, I know this is pretty far away from your foot. And that's where I will, I have a poster on my wall that has a picture of a person that you can see all of their organs, and it has a little explanation of all these different explanations of what tends to be tied to those organs. And I will, again, depending on the person, sometimes I jump into that in the first session. Sometimes that's more the third or fourth time. Once I've got their trust usually at this point. I've taught them a lot and released things, and then I have to add on layers of information or treatment when they're ready for it.
Looking for personalized workout plans? Whether you prefer to train at home or hit the gym, try a 14-day free trial of the Think Fitness Life mobile app. Get customized workouts, nutrition guidance, and coaching from a qualified professional who will be in your corner every step of the way. Visit www.thinkfitnesslife.com to start your free trial today. That's www.thinkfitnesslife.com.
So I want to address the sorry, I was taking a little note there. I want to address the big elephant in the room then, Brent. So why do we hurt in the first place? Why do these things stay on us? Why can't I just experience this stress, go into this position, and then 5 minutes later take a deep breath and be gone with it, and not? Yeah.
Well, it becomes like pain itself is a perception more than a physical entity. Like you can't go in and cut it out of you. Like the people will try. Like I've had years of seeing people go getting knee like 10 scopes on their knee or having a lot of back surgeries and having an expectation on the other side that their pain's going to feel better. And sometimes it might if it was genuinely structural. I'm just going to close this. But as I said, it's more of a perception. Our bodies are just a big collection of sensory feedback loops that help us sort of experience the world and move through it. And we have in our nervous system, we have nerves that their direct job is to help us sense pain, to help protect ourselves. We have pain receptors that sense sharp and dull and sort of hot and cold, and that's part of the experience of being us. And we have our nervous system is the wiring of everything, and a lot starts getting embedded in it. Our memories are not just in our brain. Our nervous system is an extension of that, and so people will we experience the world through our bodies, and we end up getting a lot of bangs and crashes and things, particularly if you're an athlete over the years, and just physical, emotional traumas, particularly things that happened to us when we were younger. Like your emotions, they call them feelings because you feel them. Your body will get like you'll brace or tense if you're nervous, if you're worried, and that becomes a hard wiring of where your body will start to hold tension. It doesn't mean something's structurally wrong with you. If you do structurally damage or injure something, our bodies are pretty good at healing that over 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how old you are. The further and further time you get from a structural injury, the more and more the pain you feel or experience is usually related to a sensitization in your nervous system around that area than it is a structurally damaged thing. And we can start to misinterpret little stimuluses that come to us that are supposed to just help us understand where we are in space as a noxious stimulus, because our bodies are kind of scared of that area. If you didn't understand what was happening when you did get hurt and you had some fear associated with it, and just you started to create this bracing compensation strategy, if you didn't do a great job of kind of trying to habituate to that and work through it and make sense of it, little things physical and emotional things can start to trigger your body's nervous system to kind of overly attenuate to or pay attention to areas where they should just be ignored.
Yeah. So would you say that it's almost like the neural circuitry kind of stacks on top of itself? So we experience a trauma and we fold forward, and then we experience another trauma and it has us act a certain way, and then we kind of like it has like a snowball effect, would you say?
It can. It really ends up being
I guess what I'm getting at is why doesn't it process through and then just be out of us, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, we're like again, like pain is a fairly, people have an intimate relationship with pain. It can be a traumatizing thing, and it gets a bit embedded in your nervous system of how things fire and how you interpret it. And so the state you were in when you hurt yourself initially, and whether you had a lot of stressors around you or you had a lot of fear associated with it, can more deeply embed that into the experience of your nervous system, versus if you understood what was going on, you had a lot of support around you, you had somebody kind of explain it to you and walk you through it and help you habituate to it. You can have two people go through the very same experience and have very wildly different sort of outcomes with it. So it's not just something that because it's not something that needs to structurally heal. It's part of it's a memory, and it's an experience. And that's not something that just goes away on its own. That's part of what getting back on the horse and moving and helping your body habituate to it and understand it and not be scared of it.
Yeah.
That's how the pain starts to go away.
Yeah. Because we have a survival bias, right? That'll say that we're 15 times more likely to do something to avoid pain versus more likely to do something to gain, joy or something. So I think that can steer us awry, unfortunately. But you have a very uncommon approach to physical therapy and physical trauma. To your point, people kind of think, oh, I'm stressed, I'm making it all up, essentially. But there's a very real component, a very physiological component there. And I don't want to discredit all of the degrees that you've gotten and the training you've gotten, but how much would you say what you do for your clients you had to learn by experience through your own personal injury, and then just through working with people?
Oh, I would say most of it. Like,
Yeah.
you get I get a good grounding and understanding anatomy and physiology and stuff through a kin degree and through a physio degree, but you learn a lot by just really seeing how wildly different people's personalities are, and how, like, seeing different people's sort of takes on the world. You learn a lot about yourself by and particularly working, like, I come into people's lives in their moment of need. Like, they're coming to me with, like, they're struggling or they're having some trouble, and so it teaches you empathy. It teaches you to have more understanding about sort of the just human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And and then me going through a lot of physical traumas myself, I would say I took a lot of different postgraduate courses that taught me a lot as well. But
Mm-hmm.
to make sense of those, I had to have some experience in working with people already. The thing that's taught me the most is, in terms of anatomy and physiology and the non-intuitive pain referral patterns, has been the process of learning IMS,
The
strand
dry
needling.
needling.
It really helps you understand the nervous system in a very different way that I think a lot of people would benefit from understanding.
Yeah.
But then, going through my own traumas, and a lot of people, and I get into a lot of those stories in my book, and I've sort of a meaningful way. And I started shifting more from taking physical therapy courses to reading psychology books and books on
Mm.
trauma. And because in helping people with chronic and resistant pain, I do end up becoming their their counselor or their psychologist through a lot
Yeah.
of it. And people will come in, like, people have a harder time going to talk to a counselor, but than they will if something hurts coming into a physio. Um, so a lot of people, when I get it, I'm happy to play that role for people, and some people I get to a point I'm like, well, you also need to see a counselor.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
though it is called physical therapy, it's not like there is a process that people need to learn from it and do things repetitively. And like, the premise of a mind body connection is not new, but
Mm-hmm.
what I try to do in my books is help people connect that to anatomy. Like, we all kind of will, like, my elbow hurts, why does my elbow hurt, like, and sort of draw that back in a few different stages of understanding a bit of your nervous system, how that relates to how you're sitting at your desk all day, or how you're lifting weights, and the life stresses. They're equally important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that you include it all, and you kind of are a hybrid model of the psychology component and the physical therapy component. Why do you think people misconstrue stress or anxiety as kind of a fake problem with their body or their system? Do you think that's maybe
um,
an older viewpoint, and we're moving towards a future where people understand understand more of the physicality associated?
I would say yes. I think that there's less of a stigma around it now, and there's more of a less people brushing it off as, like, oh, that's all in your head, or, oh, there's a placebo effect to this or that. And so people are more accepting of it, but a lot of people, um, you have to be, it's a bigger can of worms to open in terms of like trying to realize that the root of your issue is the stresses in your life. You might not
Mm,
have a lot of control over those at the time, or might
right.
not want to go talk to a counselor about what happened with your mother when you were 10.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we all have very, very busy lives, and it's people have to get to it at the right moment to be ready to try to make some life changes.
Yeah.
And sometimes, a lot of times, people just need their back to feel a bit better so they can keep doing something. And
Right.
if they, after you treat them a few times and you start to pick your moment of when to explain to them, like, okay, well, yeah, I can just keep dropping the little pieces of information to help them see that this is partly a product of their own making, or the environment that they've placed themselves in. um, they slowly start to become more open to the idea, but you
Yeah.
can't just drop it on someone and say, "Oh, that's just stress," because that's what then it gets a bit sort of swept under the rug. You have to
Yeah.
see the interaction between the role stress has and how that's held in your tissues, and
Right.
you can. It's more tangible to start with the physical thing, and then work your way back towards seeing that this is a recurrent pattern of why you're always clenching your jaw and your neck hurts and your back's getting sore.
It's like there's a quote that's like, sometimes we are get hit by a 2x4, and then you get hit by a 4x8, and then you get hit by a steamroller. And once you get hit by the steamroller, you finally make changes. But yeah, it's like people have like a mental bandwidth to what they can address. And yeah, it's like if you have a car that might make a funky sound but it still gets you from A to B, you're probably too afraid to take it to the repair shop because who knows how costly and time consuming it's going to be to get the whole thing looked at. So be careful, anyone
Yeah.
who is in just a little bit of pain. If you go to Brent, you might be going for just an ankle injury, but you might fix your whole body.
Hmm. Yeah, I end up my day, I end up seeing a new person every half an hour, and I treat people from like 9 to 90. And it's kind of, I say it's like sort of speed dating with other people's discomfort. I go from working with like a Ironman triathlete to a 90-year-old lady that just wants to walk a block to a mother of three. And everyone has very different but equally important stressors in their life, and they have to figure out what those are and how much of them are physical, how much of them are emotional, and don't assume you just have one or the other. And
Right.
yeah, you might come in with an ankle injury and I start treating your heart somehow.
Yeah. And your childhood trauma.
Yeah.
um,
Well, that I push off to the counselors, but I never sort of acknowledge it as an issue.
right. I was just teasing. But so we talked a lot about your first book, Why Things Hurt. Did we briefly touch on why we hurt? Or do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Kind of the
Yeah.
differences?
Again, the first one is more I get into sort of like the postural pieces of help people understand common different posture types and the role that products like shoes, like barefoot shoes or minimalist
Mm,
shoes or the Hoka shoes, or that was before the Hokas were around, but and helping, and both of them are full of stories that of how I've helped people through it. The second one, again, it starts by sort of help. The first section is called "How Your Body Actually Works," explained like you're five, and then explained like you're 35, and then explained like you're 65, because it
mm,
acknowledges that what's important is changes at your different phase of life. We have
yeah.
to learn how to use your body as you're developing when you're a kid, and you have to learn to use your body as you're
As you
degenerating as you
age.
get older.
Yeah.
And your physicality can change and your mindset might not keep up with it, so you have to learn to connect those two.
Yeah.
And then it gets into understanding your story, which I get into a bit of my story, being now more 10 years out on bad my bad injury, and also a lifelong sort of process of hurting myself, and 21 years of being a physio, and of helping others and seeing people get through a lot. Um, and
And where can
Yeah,
people
it
go
sort of
to where can people go to find these books?
they're both available on Amazon. If you can sort of, the second one I did record the audiobook version too. It's particularly books like this, and particularly people that are more on the ADHD side, which comes with a lot of anxiety and tension held in your body, can have a hard time sitting down and reading a book about personal development. So I find I tell people all the time, I'm like, go read this audiobook or sort of listen to this audiobook. So I couldn't say that and then not record the audiobook version. So
Right.
it's available on Audible and Apple Books, and I'm about to put it more broadly available on a few other platforms too. You can find that at whythingshurt.com.
Excellent. I do better with coloring books with no words. So if you release a coloring book that could teach me about my body, that'd be great.
Yeah. That's why I remember learning anatomy initially. Was the anatomy coloring book. It was a big one.
So I do always like to kind of wrap up with some more fun questions. Brent, do you personally have a favorite lift in the gym or a favorite activity you like to do for exercise?
I would say at the moment I'm not doing a lot of lifting in the gym. I do have a personal training gym in my clinic, and my business partner gives me a hard time that I'm rarely in there with them. I did a lot of sort of weightlifting and training when I was younger, and as I'm older, I have 3 kids. I'm running 2 clinics, and I work full time. That I realized what I need out of what I really enjoy for my exercise is sports, so I play hockey. I play sort of beer league hockey, and I get a great kind of aerobic and anaerobic workout out of it. I get the socialization with a bunch of guys and have a beer afterwards, and it's what fills my bucket more than lifting weights now. And I try to go I walk my dog and go for short runs and sort of go watch my kids play sports. That's sort of that's what keeps me moving.
Excellent. Yeah, you got to keep the cardio up if you're running around after 3 teenagers. 3 kids. Yeah. And what's your favorite quote? If one maybe come to mind.
I would say given the nature of what I do and what I've lived through is the sort of classic Mike Tyson one of everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Where nobody plans on falling out of bed or getting hit by a car, and you don't necessarily make a plan B when you're spend all your time working on plan A. So I think it's you can plan as much as you want, but one of the biggest means of getting through life in a successful, happy way is being available and ready to pivot when you need to.
Yeah, adapt, right? Life has changed whether we accept it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Brent, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for telling your story, and thanks for sharing all this with our audience.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.